Right now, under a sheet of ice most people will never see, there's a fight happening. No soldiers marching, no missiles flying, yet. But it's a fight. And it's over something most of us assume will be frozen forever. It won't be. Here's the thing. The Arctic is melting faster than almost any climate model predicted 10 years ago.
And as that ice disappears, it's not just polar bears losing their home. It's opening a map, a brand new map with brand new roads, sitting on top of an ocean that used to be untouchable. 5 countries know it: Russia, the United States, Canada, Norway, and, strangely, China, a country that isn't even in the Arctic.
So why is Beijing spending billions on an ocean thousands of miles from its coastline? Let that sink in for a second, because the answer isn't really about ice at all.
For most of human history, the Arctic Ocean was sealed, a hard, permanent lid of ice covering roughly 6 million square miles at its peak. Ships couldn't cross it, armies couldn't hold it. Nobody bothered fighting over land nobody could reach. So the Arctic became background, a frozen edge of the map, cold, empty, irrelevant.
That was the assumption for centuries, and it made sense, until it didn't. Since the late 1970s, satellite data shows Arctic sea ice has shrunk by roughly 13% per decade in September, the month it hits its lowest point. 13% every 10 years. That number sounds small until you realize what it actually means. A solid, permanent barrier is turning into open water, one summer at a time.
And open water means something specific to 5 governments watching very closely. It means a shortcut. The Northern Sea Route, hugging Russia's Arctic toast, can cut the shipping distance between East Asia and Europe by nearly 40% compared to the route through the Suez Canal. 40%.
That's not a minor efficiency gain. That's the kind of number that rewrites global trade. And it means oil. The U.S. Geological Survey estimates the Arctic holds around 90 billion barrels of undiscovered oil and nearly 1,670 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, something like 13% of the world's remaining undiscovered oil and 30% of its undiscovered gas, sitting mostly offshore, mostly underwater that used to be solid. 90 billion barrels under ice that's disappearing right now.
Russia moved first, and it moved fast. Since 2014, Moscow has reopened or built more than 50 military sites along its Arctic coastline. Old Soviet airstrips brought back to life, new radar stations, refurbished ports. Russian territory accounts for roughly half of the entire Arctic coastline. So, in a strange way, this was always going to be Russia's game to lose.
And Russia has been willing to make the point physically, not just militarily. Back in 2007, a Russian submarine descended more than 2 miles to the seafloor beneath the North Pole and planted a titanium flag on the ocean floor. Purely symbolic, no legal weight at all. But the message wasn't really for lawyers. It was for everyone else watching the ice melt.
Canada took note. Ottawa has long claimed the Northwest Passage as internal waters, a claim the United States has never fully accepted, insisting instead that it's an international strait open to all. 2 allies quietly disagreeing over who gets to control a route that for most of history didn't even exist as a usable path.
Then there's China. Beijing has no Arctic coastline at all. Its nearest point sits roughly 900 miles south of the Arctic Circle. And yet, in 2018, China's government released a formal Arctic policy that called itself a near-Arctic state, a phrase that means nothing geographically and everything strategically. China has poured money into Arctic research stations, icebreaker ships, and Russian gas projects like Yamal LNG. Not because Beijing cares about the cold, because Beijing cares about routes, the same routes that could one day move Chinese goods to European ports without touching a single contested strait in the South China Sea.
Norway, meanwhile, has spent decades quietly building the infrastructure nobody else bothered with. Arctic oil platforms, deep water ports, a coast guard that actually knows these waters. Oslo doesn't shout about its position the way Moscow or Beijing do. It doesn't need to. Norway has been operating up here the whole time, patiently, while the rest of the world argued about whether the Arctic mattered at all.
So picture the room. Russia holding half the coastline and a head start measured in decades. The United States catching up late and uneasy about it. Canada defending a passage it insists is already its own. Norway and China, a guest that invited itself in and is paying for a seat at the table anyway. 5 very different countries, one shrinking sheet of ice standing between all of them and what's underneath it. Steady and unglamorous.
And that's where it gets uncomfortable. NATO has watched Russian bombers fly Arctic patrol routes it hasn't seen since the Cold War. Norway has quietly expanded its own northern garrisons. The United States has restarted regular Arctic naval exercises for the first time in decades, and it reopened a permanent consulate in Greenland, a chunk of Arctic territory suddenly worth paying very close attention to.
Nobody has fired a shot, but everybody is building for the day someone might. Now here's where it gets personal, even if you've never seen snow in your life. If the northern sea route becomes fully viable, shipping costs drop. That touches the price of the phone in your pocket, the coffee on your counter, the car parts sitting in a warehouse somewhere, waiting on a delayed shipment.
Global trade doesn't stay abstract for long. It shows up in your receipts, whether you ever think about the Arctic or not. And if energy companies start pulling oil and gas from underneath that ocean at scale, that reshapes who holds leverage over energy markets for the next 50 years, long after most of us have stopped thinking about melting ice altogether.
There's something strange about that. A warming planet, something almost everyone agrees is a crisis, is also quietly functioning as a starting gun. The very thing damaging the Arctic is the same thing making it valuable. Nobody planned that irony. It just happened, the way these things usually do. Slowly, then all at once. This isn't really a story about the Arctic. It's a story about what happens when the map changes, and 5 countries scramble to claim the version of the world that comes next. The ice is still there, for now.
But every September, a little less of it comes back. And somewhere north of the Arctic Circle, in the dark, in the cold, in water that used to be solid ground, the next Cold War isn't waiting to start. It already has.